Hello, and welcome back to Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce, a podcast about workforce issues in the manufacturing industries. I'm your host, Amanda Del Buono. In our first episode, we discussed the fact that the manufacturing sector isn't the most glamorous, and it's often not seen by young people as a potential career path. To further discuss this and share with us some innovative digital training methods that can help to fill the skills gap while also attracting young people, we're joined by Samar Forsley, CEO of Simutech Multimedia, a company that specializes in simulation-based training for the manufacturing and electrical troubleshooting industry. Prior to his role at Simutech Multimedia, Samar was Vice President of Marketing at Pythian and eBuildMe and has held several other management positions. A winner of the 2010 Ottawa 40 Under 40 Award, he holds an MBA from the University of Ottawa Telfer School of Management, where he's also a part-time lecturer. Thanks for joining us today, Samar.
Thank you, Amanda, and we're excited to be here with you and to chat with you and your audience about all the cool things that are happening in manufacturing. It's a great time to be in the space, and looking forward to sharing our experience and insight.
Awesome. Well, why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about what you guys do at Simutech Multimedia and how you help train workers for the manufacturing industries.
Yeah, for sure. So Simutech has been around for 22 years now. Actually, we launched our first training module 20 years this year. And it's been a learning experience for us for sure over time. But quickly, we help manufacturing companies teach electrical maintenance staff how to troubleshoot. And the best way to think about what we do is an airline pilot does not necessarily just jump in a jumbo jet and start flying it. Like, they go to school first, then they train in a simulator, and then they go actually fly the real thing. And so that's what we do. We provide that simulation so that electrical maintenance staff who come from school with some background knowledge don't just jump and start troubleshooting and playing with real live equipment where they could hurt themselves or damage equipment. They practice in our simulator, and then they're ready to go and be productive and help the factories keep the lines going.
Talk us through some of the companies you work with so far. You mentioned in previous interviews working with Kraft, Tyson, and Ford Motor Company. How exactly did you work with them, and who initiated these conversations?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to kind of think about it is with the way we help companies to start with. So there's two ways our simulation software is used, okay? The first way is to assess an individual and assess their skill set. So if I gave you a simulation to solve a problem, I can monitor what you are doing and see if you're actually following proper standards, if you're following proper safety protocols, if you're solving the problem without changing parts that you're not supposed to, et cetera, right? So when we are helping companies assess employees, that conversation happens with the HR department. Actually, sometimes happens during the recruitment cycle. So, everybody's resume always looks good, but how do you test for somebody's critical thinking, right? And the best way to do it is to give them a problem to solve where you can actually see what's happening and get a full record of that. And so when the conversation around how we help manufacturers comes to recruiting, and assessment, we have that with HR. When it's about training existing staff on whether it's closing the skills gap or we're moved from traditional electromechanical components to automation and PLCs and all that exciting stuff, that is about getting the existing team up to speed. And in that case, we're having conversations with the plant managers, maintenance managers, sometimes on the engineering side and sometimes on the operations side. So it could be like VP Ops, Director of Operations, et cetera.
How do you set up the programs for them? Are they specifically designed for the company, or are they universal for a variety of companies?
So they are universal. We basically try to get the most common elements down to a universal simulation, because there's a couple of things. First of all, we're teaching the concept of thinking through a problem and solving it. And the second thing is that most factories, the reality is, has more than one provider. So like if it's a PLC, it could be a Siemens PLC or a different brand. It doesn't really matter. They kind of behave in a similar way. And so we're trying to teach the generic concept. And again, that's the way to describe it. We compare ourselves a lot to the airline industry, right? So if I am flying a plane and I encounter a problem, I need to recognize first what problem I'm in. Let's say I'm in a stall, right? So the corrective action for a stall, and when I'm flying the plane, is to push the yoke forward and increase speed, right? Eventually the plane dips down, picks up speed, and takes off. That action is the same whether I'm flying a little four-seater Cessna or a big jumbo jet, no different, right? So when I encounter a problem, I need to recognize that's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and then the corrective actions are pretty much similar, right? And also no different, for example, if you're driving a Honda today and tomorrow you get the keys to BMW, I mean, you might need a second to figure out, well, how do some things work, but eventually you'll just go, yeah, the basics are the same, I'm going to get in this car and drive it. So we're teaching the concepts that are applicable to all scenarios and all components.
Okay, makes sense. So kind of moving on, from your point of view, which we talked about a little bit before we started recording, manufacturing has a less than glamorous reputation. How do you think the industry could work to improve that perception and attract, younger tech-savvy employees?
Yeah. So the truth is that the industry has to start working better with schools in some sense, right? Even at high school level or at the local college level. So like here, we work a lot with industry, but we also work a lot with colleges because they need to start evangelizing and teaching the concepts early before I graduate from my local community college and figure out what I'm going to do with myself when I graduate. If there are some joint programs that, A, teach what is required, but B, explain that manufacturing is actually pretty neat and cool. So if you think about it, a factory floor today, if it was built like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it has the perception of, yeah, it's dirty work, et cetera. That's fine, got it. But like, if you actually walk down a factory floor, there's robotics, there's PLCs, there's computer programming. There's a lot of skills that the younger generations, the Gen Zers, the Millennials, are learning when they're in school. So if you're a Gen Zer today and you're in grade 10, you are learning to program, whether it's Raspberry Pi, whether it's Makey, whether any of those fun games, right? And so you want to be able to carry on that excitement and learning when you actually get to the workplace. But actually manufacturing is the perfect place for that because as you're walking down the factory floor, you're encountering really cool equipment that is automated, that requires a lot of not just hands-on experience, but also you have to use your judgment and your training. And so it's a great place to work. I think it's an exciting place to work. And I think manufacturing needs to tell that story early on to students as they are in colleges.
Right. So are you an advocate for STEM programs, or do you work to encourage young people at all yourself?
Yeah. So we absolutely have a lot of first of all, for example, on our website, we give our software pretty much a good chunk of it for students for free. And we do have a schools program. We do some of our modules available to schools for free. But we work a lot with schools when they have grants, when they have the STEM program in place to get them using the software to start training people. We actually have quite a fair bit amount of schools that are using it as part of the STEM program.
Awesome. Well, as you're speaking about attracting kids when they're younger, I saw in some of your speeches you talked about gamification. I'm kind of wondering what you mean by that and how you think manufacturers can implement it.
Yeah. So I actually want to take a second first to kind of talk about the word itself, gamification, because there's actually the word is used in different contexts, and it matters what context you're coming from. So the first way it's used is think of it as like I'm gamifying a boring task, right? Or I'm gamifying an everyday task. So if I use my Starbucks app to collect stars whenever I scan every morning, Starbucks has gamified my coffee purchasing experience, right? So it's a task that I do every day. It's just a very basic task. But there's excitement that I'm collecting stars and I can redeem them towards a sandwich one day or whatever. And so that's one way of describing gamification, right? And then there's the other concept, which is gaming. And that is the idea of using game-like technology to do something, to achieve a task, right, or a purpose. And so in our world, when we talk about gamification, we're kind of talking about both ends of that. So we are in the games space. We deliver what we call serious games because really that simulation is, think of it as a serious video game that's going to teach a concept. But we also layer things like leaderboards and reporting and badging, and that's gamification, right? So you want that person training to get engaged with, like, well, how am I doing? How am I doing compared to my buddy down the aisle or down, in a different department, right? Am I progressing? Am I learning better? And so there's a gamification element of it, but we are using game technology to teach serious concepts. And so that's how we approach it. And I think that's very important for the millennials and the Gen Zers especially because, again, if you think about schools today, even grade school, like, grade 1 to 6, they are starting to play with technology like Dash and Dot and different cool robotics to actually learn to program them and so on. So people today, actually the new generation of workers learns by gaming, not by, like, nobody memorizes multiplication tables anymore. That's just like done, right? And so you learn by activity and you learn by gaming. And so I think it's very important for all companies to adopt that, but especially manufacturing, because we need to attract new talent from that generation that's coming up.
Interesting. Well, there was one more term you've used I wanted to ask you about, which is the double skills gap. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, like how we see the situation on the ground, at least. So people talk about the skills gap, and it's kind of like there's the skills gap, and the new people coming on board don't necessarily have the experience we need. So that's usually how it's discussed, right? But we see that for sure, and we see a different skill gap. So the first one that everybody in the market sees is the new crew coming on board, and while they have some technology savviness, they have some theoretical background because they just finished school, they don't have the hands-on experience, and they don't have like the ability to think through a problem and troubleshoot it, right? And that's what we're trying to teach in our simulation, right? And so we're trying to close the industry know-how and industry knowledge gap for the new generation, okay? Now, the other side of this is that there's the boomers or the later Xers who are towards the end of their career, and when they went through school and learned how to maintain things on the factory floor, they learned how to use electromechanical components. So this still exists on the factory floor today, but you would in the past have a big cabinet that has all these components in it, and this cabinet did one thing, and then if something went wrong with it, you know where to go and fix it. Now this big cabinet is being replaced by a very small component called the PLC, like a logic controller, right? And so, okay, so the new technology that comes on the factory floor is new learning for someone who's been there doing it that same way for a long, long time. And so the older generation is facing an avalanche of technology coming at them, whether that's through robotics, whether through automation, you name it, right? And so while they have the industry experience, they have the know-how, they have the ability to think through problems, they may not be able to fix them because they are now facing a technology gap and that everything is different and new. And so we're trying to close that gap as well. So when you introduce, for example, a PLC into a factory floor, well, your team that's been there for a long, long time and learning, or not learning, but knowing how to troubleshoot the old equipment, how do you get them up to speed on this new thing they've never seen before? And let's face it, at 50-something, do I want to go back to school and sit and read the textbook? I don't. I need a better way to consume that knowledge.
Right, that makes sense. So with that in mind, what kind of digital training tools do you advocate for? Are there different tools depending on if it's a new hire coming in or if it's someone who's been in the industry for a long time?
Yeah, so again, like it's usually never a one trick thing, right? Or like not one tool that's going to deliver, everything. I mean, we're very proud of what we do, but we can deliver a good component of the training, but we don't have the whole experience, right? So if you think about what a maintenance professional has to go through in the day, right? So there's the preventative maintenance they have to do. There's planned stuff that they actually have to kind of execute on a given day. They need a way to track that. They need a way to analyze what they're doing there. But they also need some basic background, knowledge. And so there are some tools out there that give you some basic e-learning on, how to deal with motors and how to deal with PLCs and how to deal with VFDs and so on. But that's not enough. So you then need to kind of back to the airline industry. That background knowledge is not going to be enough. You need the simulation, right? So that's where we come in. And so if you just put a simulator but don't teach the background information, the employee is going to struggle. If you just give the theory and without the simulation, the employee will struggle, right? And so it's almost a layering of all those tools and getting the employee through them in a planned stage rollouts, right? So you go through some stuff here in the e-learning, for example, then you practice in the simulator, then you go try it in real life kind of thing, right? So you have to blend between the different technologies that are available to deliver a full solution.
Okay. Well, what do you think it's going to take to spur organizations to consider using these newer training tools like simulation?
So the truth is that there is a lot of companies that are already going down the path, right? So we have an extensive list of customers, like Tyson you mentioned, like Kraft, like Coke, like there's a few companies who are either adopted or adopting what we do. There are many companies who are also investing heavily in building their own VR, artificial intelligence, AR tools to train people, right? But there's a lot of companies that are not there, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it takes an event to happen to kind of, sometimes it's like we fail the safety audit. Sometimes it's like we're hiring and, we don't know how to bring people in. And sometimes it just takes a chunk of people to retire at the same time. In the food manufacturing industry, for example, we have a lot of customers there. We hear that the retention rates are not great. People are retiring, and then you bring somebody in. It's a competitive market. They leave. So you're always training, right? So there has to be some trigger internally that drives people forward to look for a solution. Now, some of it is on us to kind of tell the story and advocate how companies can benefit from simulation training. But the truth is actually, conversations are happening, and across the board, I think, people in manufacturing understand that there's the skills gap issue is not going away anytime soon. And the more they wait, the worse it gets as the boomers retire, right? And so they're all looking at their 2-3 year plans now going, what are we going to do? And they are researching and reaching out. So it's actually overall a rosy picture in that sense, in that people understand that there's the issue and then they need a solution. So.
As a millennial, I can understand where using innovative technology during training would appeal to people like me, where getting in a simulator would be exciting for me. But how do older employees like baby boomers or Generation X, how are they responding to training in this way? I think of my parents, and I can't imagine either of them getting in a simulator, but I do underestimate them sometimes.
Yeah, so, it's unique. Actually, we're in a unique time. There's 6 generations alive today, and 4 of them are at work. This has never happened before. It's never happened before. And so if you look today, there's boomers, Xers, millennials, and Zers are all in the workplace. And they behave differently, and they consume learning very, very differently, right? And so when we first launched our software 20 years ago, it was so cool. It was really cool for Xers and the boomers. And when we launched it, it was kind of designed simplified, because you don't want to technology overwhelm someone. And so part of it is the design of the actual software that helps them go through it. Now, there's always, I don't need this, I know everything kind of thing. That's happens sometimes. But you also have to kind of think through, well, what's the alternative? I mean, you need to kind of learn some these concepts. And so while there is some resistance for the boomers, especially in the beginning, once they get into it, they become actually quick advocates of it, because they see it mimics real life. And because we made it super easy for them to navigate and use it, we tend to do well with that generation. Now, for the millennials and the Xers, not the Xers, for the Zers, that generation is absolutely different. So where the millennials are all about customization, right? Because that generation grew up with everything being custom tailored to their liking, right? And so where we've had, for example, the software following a specific path for the Xers and boomers, that does not work for the millennials. The millennials like, oh, I know that, I don't need that, I know, you know what I mean? So I need that. So how can you customize the delivery of the learning for me? And you know about me so you can train me better, right? And so our software had to change over the years to adjust to that. So while we kept the simplicity of the interface for the boomers and Xers, we've incorporated, better learning about the individual to customize that for the millennials. Now the Zers are very different. So the Zers are all about now, instant feedback. I want feedback, right? So I did a task, they did a good job, thumbs up emoji, right? So we are now changing our software yet again to be ready for that generation being full on the factory floor. So that's where the gamification comes into place. That's where instant feedback comes into place. We're adding artificial intelligence into it so we can actually give that instant feedback to the employee as they are learning. And so we have to adjust with the generations as they come along, but keeping that simplicity for the older generation who's using it.
So what's it like for your company to have to evolve that software with the times? Is there a lot that has to go into that? Is it more challenging for you? We talked prior about how your programs are universal, so I imagine this adds another layer of complexity for you.
Yeah, so the technology underneath the software is completely changing. So it's almost like we are rewriting it from scratch, right? Because like as we go on, right, and you look at that next generation coming on board, it has to be more immersive, again, because they're so used to gaming and learning by gaming. So we're going from, like, for example, our 2D look and feel and simulation to now a 3D full-on simulation. We can actually put glasses on and actually kind of walk through a scene and actually troubleshoot in VR, right? And so that means a significant technology change on our side. So that means you have to kind of retool the whole company from what technology are we using, what databases are we using, the skill sets of our own teams, right? So we are able to build the new stuff. So it is quite a change, but it's also going to be a change for our customers because they are going to experience the software in a very different way. But it is a change required and necessary for the future.
Right. We kind of touched on it a bit, but I'm wondering if there's any new or innovative technology that you're excited to implement in your programs. Is there anything you're kind of keeping your eye on that could be a cool new thing to add to your simulations?
Yeah, so right now we're working on 3D and on VR. So, and the reason we're doing that is because, like, we also don't necessarily want to be ahead of what our customers can consume, right? And so if you think about VR, that requires headsets that all the manufacturers have to purchase so they can experience the simulation in a different way. So you want to be able to still deliver it on a laptop, but also on a VR set, right? But down the road, so as we get into AR and to adding AI into it and all these things, if we outpace what our customers can actually adopt internally, that also is a service for everyone, right? So while the technology is there are really cool technologies out there. So we're like now transforming ourselves from .NET to Unity so we can actually deliver all that experience. And we can use Unity and additional components to provide a much richer experience if you want that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the customer is ready to adopt it, right? So we have to pace with where the manufacturing industry is going and is at, right? So that's the fine balance of all of this.
It sounds like there's a fine line, and it's easy to get ahead of yourself with how quickly technology moves.
Yeah, there's so many cool tools out there. I mean, it's just actually exciting times because what you could do today, you could not do 10 years ago with simulation, but is the customer ready? So we have to balance all of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else you think our listeners should know?
So I think, just to reiterate, I think manufacturing is a really cool place to be in. I think the industry is doing great, it's growing, it's exciting times, but there is that skills gap, and there's the how do you develop an employee, right? So, and I truly think that from a employee training and then from a retention point of view, you kind of have to think through the whole employee experience. From the time you interview them till the time they're with you until they hopefully retire with the same company, that still happens. But nonetheless, what do you do along the way to make sure you're selecting the right people, train them correctly, and continue to train them as they go along? And I think everyone in the industry will be better off if they kind of thought across the board like that and assembled all the tools they needed. Simulation is a great way to do part of that, but doesn't do the whole thing. So I think overall people need to reimagine how they hire and how they train people, especially with the new generations coming on board.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Samer, for joining us and sharing all of this fantastic information. It sounds really exciting, and it'll be great to see as more and more manufacturers get on board with simulation and other, digitally savvy training methods. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to stay in touch.
Well, thank you again, and that's it for this episode of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on a single episode.